Right, morning all, and welcome back again. Our next session now is on giving feedback at assessment with Martin Chester. First of all, about this this workshop. This is a perennial sort of favourite in that you know, anybody who is assessing candidates is something that we want to get right as best we can. But it's also something that Will Hardy's PhD highlighted as a really essential coaching skill in managing candidates, so that whether it's actually at training or at assessment, that it's helping them to learn and keeping them in a positive frame of mind, so they can use it and they can use it usefully for their learning and move on. So I'm sure the vast majority of you will need no introduction to Martin, but if in case there's anybody out there who doesn't know Martin, Martin, as you can see with his logo there, is currently a freelance consultant and guide. He consults in adventure sports, and he's always been very closely connected to mountain training, not least because he had a long career at Plas y Brenin, where he was director of training and of development. So he has provided, delivered and assessed countless mountain training courses. He's actually been on the MTE board in the past. He is currently the coaching development officer for Mountain Training UK, and he's even been the executive officer for NICAS. So he knows climbing walls as well as the outdoors as well. So without any further chat, I'm gonna pass you over to Martin and put you in his safe hands.
Thanks, guys. Thanks very much for that. It's quite an introduction, but it's also quite a list of people on the attendees list here. So super impressed in the amount of experience we've got sort of online today. It's very lovely to see a load of familiar faces, old and new. Today's session, of course, don't forget it's being recorded. If you could, obviously most people have got their names up. If you could make sure your full name is displayed, so we're unable to accredit, you know, if you come in on somebody else's login. Kat will be busy taking a register for that. Don't forget, please mute your microphone, but we'll be keeping a beady eye on all of that. So if you want to put your hand up, type something in the chat box or simply use the hand up function, and that would be great. Given how much experience we've got, I'm going to try very hard, albeit wacky through this medium, to get you guys to contribute as much as possible. So I'll take you through the plan in a minute. And the title of the session is Giving Feedback at Assessment. I'm going to talk about every single stage of that. The whole point is that I want to sort of get us to have a conversation about how we set that up as well as how we deliver it. So there's no NAF role-playing exercises. There's no NAF feedback models for us to go through. This is proper anecdote or hardcore experience of being at the coalface and doing this a lot. And as Guy says, I've been in a very lucky position to be able to moderate enough people that have been delivering assessment courses as well. So I've seen this done a lot. But I really want to add your experience into the mix. So just to begin with, let's have a quick look and get you guys kind of active and involved online. And there was a time when we used to have to tell everybody how to use the annotate function on Zoom, but I think you're all over it now. Everybody's probably better at this than I am, so let's go with it. If you could just throw some marks on that screen and just let us know where you are, or put something in the chat room and tell us. Brilliant. There's a lot of people enjoying the weather in Snowdonia today. I'm sure you're getting similar weather in the Lake District. We've got everybody up into the north of Ireland. And all the way down to Essex there. Greetings, Andy. Fantastic. Nice to see Alan in the peak there. Sunny Dolgethley. We don't believe you, Graham. It'll be lashing with rain. Brilliant. Apologies for your internet, Richard. That's a nightmare. We'll see what we can do. We'll shout if you need to. Just let us know. And good to see everybody. Right, look, we'll move on. I'm going to try and get you involved as much as possible through all of this. So if you can keep an eye on the chat room, that would be great. It's another medium for us to be able to sort of share comments. And it's also a great way for you to be able to shut me up if I prattle on too much. So, you know, bear that in mind if you need to keep it quiet. So let us, without any further ado, move into the content. The aims for the session today, apologies to any of you that either don't have kids of the right age or haven't actually indulged in watching Kung Fu Panda. But I always think the aims for this, if you're going to be the perfect assessor, is to be more Shifu. And Master Shifu here, I think, is the ideal assessor in that he's got big eyes, big ears, teeny tiny mouth, and an enormous heart. A very sort of compassionate, supportive master. And really, we're going to apply that throughout every stage of the assessment process. I'd like us to think about being more proactive from the outset. So prevention is better than cure. And if we can set our assessment tasks up and our assessment courses up well, then actually giving feedback is really easy. And a lot of the issues that we might deal with later sort of go away. However, we are going to be reactive. We are going to bump into things. And I want to get you guys sharing your issues that you've faced and the strategies that we've used to overcome with those and deal with those. And it's really important for you guys to share your experience. But I want you to go away with some tangibles. I want you to go away with some practical tools and models that will actually help and will enable you to build a philosophy for how you're going to improve and do this better in the future. So that's our sort of whistle-stop plan for the session there. Very quickly, if you can throw a few ticks on these courses, let's see who we're dealing with in terms of people's assessing experience. So anything that you assess on, throw a mark over the top of the syllabus for us. If nothing else, you can sit back and be staggered by the dazzling array of different courses that we now have on offer there. Fantastic. It's great at this point. In terms of talking about assessment, it's great. I'm getting an awful lot of feedback about how skilled you are with the, yeah, exactly. There we are. Somebody does a whole lot. Brilliant. And there's no pressure with any of this. It's you know, as you can see, we've got some comments coming in from the chat room. I'm just really keen that you guys are confident to just get stuck in and interact with this. And I don't want any of you feeling like you can't do that at any point. That's brilliant. Great. Thank you for that. Again, I'll clear those. So just hold fire there and we'll move on. It's a really good mix of experience, actually. In putting these slides together, I've tried really hard not to be too focused on one scheme and not to be too sort of English or Welsh or Scottish or Irish centric. As you can see, we've got people sort of scattered everywhere. So there's a little bit of everything, and hopefully the principles will apply from indoor climbing walls right through to you know, winter assessments. So the plan today, I really want to focus this on candidate-centered assessments. It's all about our ability to support the candidate. And I think if we keep that focus in our minds from the outset, it will help us do a really good job and think about who this feedback is for, you know, who it sort of benefits, why we're doing it. I'm going to take you on a step-by-step sort of chronological journey through the assessment process, right from the start of the course to delivering the results and beyond. We want to think about what those steps are. And as you can see here, this pretty much goes from the initial briefing right through to the sort of ongoing support afterwards. And we'll throw more than just a nod to Will Hardy's research in terms of how we support candidates through that whole process. And instantly, for example, you could add a block on the start of there of the process of getting to assessment in the first place. But given that we're talking about feedback, I'm going to start at the initial sort of course briefing session, as that's the bit that we can really start to influence. As I say, please feel free to sort of throw anything else in the chat box or on the screen if I've missed anything at any point. Now, the way we're going to go through this is I've tried to chop this session down into 3 30-minute blocks. And we'll take a little comfort break in the middle, 5-10 minute comfort break in the middle. That should fill our 2 hours completely. And we're going to start off with thinking about how we set things up at the outset. Prevention is better than cure. And then we're going to talk about all the nitty gritty at the coalface issues. So what worked and what helped. And then we're going to talk about the end of course results session and how we can support candidates beyond that, getting that right for them. But ideally getting it right for them, they can take that information away and it doesn't just stop there. So that's the sort of plan for the next 2 hours. Easy. In terms of Will's research, the first thing for us to think about is that this assessment process has got to fit into candidates' lives. People come to us from all other walks of life. We're the lucky ones. We get to work in the outdoors and spend an awful lot of our professional time in the outdoors. But, you know, very, very competent people will turn up on an assessment, teachers or professionals, or they're used to being in charge, they're used to being in control, they're used to being dead good at what they do. And sometimes for a hobby, sometimes for a passion, sometimes for a career break, they'll step into our world. And it's really important that we make sure that our assessment process and our courses fits into their lives and fits into sort of their ability to operate. So therefore, it's no surprise at all from the research that Will was saying how their expectations are really important. You know, their efficacy, their ability to believe, and whether they've actually got what it takes to become a mountain leader is really important. And everything else to do with their sort of daily life structure needs to lead them up to this assessment process, and it needs to work for them. One of the biggest things that has an impact on that is training staff behaviour. That's super important. The way we behave, particularly on training courses, will have an enormous influence. That's our first impression. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And that will be the thing that makes them believe whether they want to be a part of this and continue through to assessment or not. So supportive behaviours will really foster some more autonomous forms of motivation. And if we look here, this sort of box here of autonomy, the people that passed, they felt like they got, you know, more autonomy in the process. They were acting in line with their own goals. They were able to be in charge of their own destiny. And in terms of structure clearly helps. The more structured things are, the more it helps people to develop those clear expectations. And that gives them the confidence to believe that they can perform those tasks successfully. And of course, the involvement at the end, the more involved they are, the more they feel like we're genuinely interested in them. Now, personally for me, and it didn't surprise me that it came out through Will's research, I've always been a real fan of this model, so the self-determination model. Effectively, we'll go really quick on this, but in order to feel motivated, to satisfy your basic psychological needs or your basic motivational needs, people need to feel like they're in charge of their own destiny. They need to feel in control, and they need to feel that they have choice. Now, most of us like being stretched a bit and like to develop ourselves a bit, but we don't like to stretch too much, and we don't like to be made to feel incompetent. So we've got a very delicate balance to strike there. People like to have those feelings of mastery and effectiveness and feel like they're getting somewhere and achieving something, but they don't like to be made to feel incompetent. And then, of course, for many of us, and this will be the one in your work, working in the outdoors, certainly in mine, you know, being part of this thing is something that we really value. You know, and it's very important for people to feel connected and involved with others that they recognise as being part of their tribe. Now, it's no surprise at all that when we bring people on assessment, what we first do is we strip this away from them, and they can very easily feel out of control if we're not careful. And we're going to test them and push them and stretch them and potentially too far. So it's no wonder at all that if we don't get these right, that we can sort of plummet their motivation and their enthusiasm to engage with the ongoing process. And that's a really important thing for us to think about as we then open up the assessment course. We've got that trap to fall into ahead of us. Now, for my money, I don't know how many of you have seen this model before, but this is a model for transactional analysis. It's a very, very simple model. I'll talk you through it in 30 seconds. For my money, the simplest way to avoid those traps is to establish a really equal adult to adult conversation from the start. Okay. Now, the transactional analysis model essentially suggests that if we adopt a parental role, so we are judgmental, what happens is we run the risk of talking down to our candidates as if they are inferior or less superior or not on an equal to us. Any element of judgment will elevate us into the parental role. And any element of being patronising and judgmental will force them into the child position. And as we all know, any of us that have got children, there's two types. There's the ones that are going to fight back and the ones that are going to turn into sort of belligerent troublemaker children if we force them into that position. So what tends to happen very quickly is if we patronise somebody, they will either become the child and adopt that child position, or they will fight us for that parental position. And if I just show you very quickly on this, you might recognise this pretty fast. And we go from us being the parent to them being the child to them fighting for parental and talking back to us in an aggressive or sort of bolshy or belligerent sort of way. We then fight for control as being the controlling parent. Now, it goes round in a loop, and it is no coincidence at all that that loop is also the sign we use for infinity, because it will go on forever. We're stuck in a trap if we're not careful. So it's really simple. All we need to do is just make sure early on in the process that we just talk to people from the outset in an adult to adult way. We're equals at the end of the day. The important thing is that we've got a common task, which is to get through the syllabus, to get through the course, to get through the assessment process, but we have different roles. So the roles are different, but the sort of the equality is the same. Yeah. And it's very clear, I think, at the start of a course to get stuck into explaining what that is. So, you know, I'm the assessor. My job is to get the best out of you. It's to find out what you can do and to set it up in a way that I'm going to structure things to bring out the best of you and to give you many opportunities to shine. Your role as a candidate is to share that with me and to let me see it. Let me see all you're working out. Let me see the processes, share the process. You don't get through this assessment by hiding things from us. And you know, we're not trying to catch you out, and you shouldn't be trying to hide. We should all be in this as equals. And that way we can think about how we can better build that empathy and understanding both ways in the process. Now, at any time when I throw questions on the screen like this, feel free. I won't flinch if you lift the phone up and take any pics, because we're going to throw you into a breakout room soon to discuss some of this. So it'd be great for you to keep some of these questions, either take notes or keep some of these questions at the forefront of your mind. And again, feel free to put things in the chat room if needs be. The next important concept in terms of digging out that information to feed back on is that the what is usually visible. This is the stuff that we see the candidate do. These are the evidence of their behaviours, their practice, their performance. And we can normally see that. We'll set them a task, we see what they deliver as a result. The interesting thing for us is that the why is very often hidden. And people will come with all sorts of mental baggage from that. If their community of support on the way into an assessment is other candidates that have struggled, they might have all sorts of rumour and speculation and hearsay about people being asked to do this or forced to do that or having to explain the other, or all sorts of weird reasons why people didn't pass an assessment. And what these do, if we're not careful, is they force barriers and they force them to shut down. They don't want to give us all the information in that open and transparent way. So the more we can help them ditch all that mental baggage, we're on your side, we've got a clear role to perform, you've got your role, we've got our role, and let's share it all in as open as possible way, then the more we can get rid of all those hang-ups. And to that end, being a course director at assessment is effectively a team leader role. The most important thing we can do at the start is provide that vision of how this is going to run, that it's okay to make mistakes like any other exam you ever did. You know, you get an A for 70% in your school exams, but people will come on a mountain leader assessment and feel like they can't show the single possible, you know, mistake or error, or they're going to be in trouble. Well, nobody gets through a whole week without making a mistake at some point. And this is the way I like to spin it with folks. If you don't admit those mistakes, you're denying yourself the opportunity to learn. It's only through admitting those blunders and those little glitches that we're going to learn from the assessment process as well. The challenges that we set are your opportunity to shine, and we will provide the support for that. So we're going to help you through the process in order for you to show us our best. And that way we can very simply use this model for transformational leadership being sort of adopted right across the outdoors at the moment. People will be familiar with it. It's really relevant to us when we're setting up an assessment. So in terms of getting that expectation right at the start, we're about to go in a breakout room, and I'd love to hear your experience on all of this. The important things is that you all have masses of different experiences and you have a different style and a different approach. Now is the time for us to kind of share that. And if you've never had the chance to chat to other people about how they manage their assessments, this is a really good opportunity to do it. What we assess should always be consistent, right? So people have turned up, they want to do their Hill and Moorland leader. It's really obvious that we're assessing them against the criteria of the Hill and Moorland leader. But how we assess that can be really variable. Now you can throw some ideas in the chat room if you'd like to while I quickly talk through these, but then we'll go into a breakout, because it's really important for us to think about why is it variable? Why do we change how we assess the course? It might be that we're dealing with different conditions. It might be particularly on winter courses that some folks are dealing with horrendous amounts of snow and avalanche. For the next week, the next candidates, they're dealing with rock hard neve everywhere. It's a very different thing. So we as assessors have to be quite creative to make sure that we can cover the whole syllabus in what is a sort of hyper-dynamic environment of the outdoors. So it's really worth us thinking about what are those typical variables and what can we do at the start of the course to prepare the candidates for that, so they're not thrown by things they perceive as being unexpected. Their understanding of our method towards the syllabus or to arrive at the syllabus might have to change and adapt with the conditions we find. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody. So without any further ado, I think it'd be really brilliant for us to split, and hopefully Kat will arrange this for us, split into some little breakout rooms and just have a little chat in terms of keeping our eyes on the prize, you know, thinking about we're going to be delivering feedback at the end of this course and at the end of each day. How can we set that up better at the outset? What is it that we do? Let's have a conversation about the good practices and the experiences we've got between us to improve the way that we set up assessments in order to better prepare candidates for their feedback later on. Good. Hopefully we've got everybody back in the room. I hope that was useful. I'm not, especially through the medium of Zoom, I'm not going to go for any big laboured sort of feedback sessions from each group. I think the most important thing is that you have a chance to have these conversations. If anything urgent comes up there, then or urgent, anything you think is kind of worthy of sharing or significant, then do throw it into the chat room, and we can sort of bring that into the conversation or the discussion for the broader group as well. So we'll see how we go with that. Hopefully that was useful. You know, it's great, certainly from the rooms that I sort of looked into, that some lovely comments about the importance of training courses, and that it's not just a source of technical information for people. They actually get a sense of the tone of how these things are going to operate and how we're going to behave, and builds their expectation of assessment, as well as our sort of support of those candidates between training and assessment. And that all came out in Will's research. But without any further ado, let's skip forward and think about the sort of the nitty-gritty actually on the hill, on the assessment process. So in terms of task setting, the basic premise of my philosophy here is that good quality evidence is the foundation of good quality feedback. And we cannot hope to give people good quality feedback unless we're gathering good quality evidence from the outset. Now, probably the best example I could ever give you of that as an anecdote was being assessed on my guide's winter test by Alan Fife. And these pictures on the right-hand side here are particularly poignant for me. We were going out into the Cairngorms for a few days. Fife had always moderated me for years when I was delivering MIC and winter ML assessments. And he always used to bang on about information per hour. Like I would get a regular sort of annual telling off for walking into, you know, Sub-Corrian Lochen and not making enough use of the footpath on the way in. And I've got to be honest, I spent all my time thinking, yeah, it's a corridor feature. How am I going to make significant, you know, judgment about navigation whilst I'm just walking into a corrie at the start of a winter climbing day? Anyway, years later, I found myself there in the car park at Cairngorm, and Fife handed me this copy of his map, which is this old 1 to 50. He said, Martin, I'd like you to take us into Schnechter, but you'll notice that the new path isn't marked on my map. If you could just draw it on, that'd be great. And I was counting my paces before I'd even locked my car. I was walking out the car park trying to work out. You can see on the new map, you know, where the junction goes and where the path goes, and this was what I had to draw on. But right from this point, I was counting the distance and working out where the path was going to split off and what direction it was heading in. And the point being, I was drawing my feedback onto this piece of paper before we'd even started the day. In terms of information per hour, he was getting masses of information out of me. In terms of quality, he was getting tons of information about the outcome and the process, you know, what was going on in my mind and my thinking, as well as the results and the outcome. Because what we're really interested in when we're gathering this information is trying to find out how consistent the candidate's performance is. you know, when they make a mistake, is it just a concentration lapse or is it a skill gap? Is it something we can see them do again and find out if it's consistent and repeatable? Or is it just a one-off that we can put down to being an unlucky blunder within a week? And of course, all of that information has to be relevant. At the end of the day, the syllabus is king. That's the thing that we're going to be assessing people against. So the better job we can do at the start, the better quality of feedback we're going to be able to give. Now, when we're setting those tasks, especially when it looks like this, when we've all been out there often enough, when it's absolutely filthy, there's nothing worse than having a candidate doing an absolutely brilliant job of the wrong thing. So we think we know what we've asked them to do. They think they know what we've asked them to do, and they go and deliver something completely different or take us to a different point. And then we've wasted everybody's time. So don't forget the importance of that sort of opening stage of the clarification. You know, this is a chance to confirm. Do you fully understand where I've asked you to go? You know, just tell me back or show me again. Where is it that I pointed to? And that gives you a chance to correct any of those errors or blunders before you're wasting time and giving good quality feedback on something that's actually turns out to be completely irrelevant. So really important to get that right. Now, I was about to say we've all been here as well. Hopefully we haven't. But we've all had similar sort of scenarios. I think one of the biggest dilemmas that we have out on the hill is when to step in and when to intervene and when to give that feedback. In my experience, there are definitely times when you have to act and things that you have to stop happening or prevent happening, or you can't let them run any further. Obviously, the minute we have to intervene, it's a pretty damning sort of indication on the results. But, you know, we've got to get in there and prevent harm. But have we got a comment at that point? And those, I think, these will be the questions that I'm going to lead you into the next breakout room with. For my money, the really important thing is that we prevent harm or injury, so things don't go wrong, but that we seize the moment, you know. And I often ask candidates to just stop there for a second and just take a mental screenshot of what's in front of you, right? Because we're going to talk about this image later on. I don't want to butt in. I don't want to break up your flow, but I really, yeah, Andy Newton, that picture's making me feel sick. Absolutely, it's horrendous. You know, I don't want to butt in, but I just want you to capture this moment so we can talk about it later, because that's always my fear, is that we'll miss the moment. If I don't step in now, I'm going to miss the ingredients. And when we have a discussion later, it's open to too much interpretation. And then the real question at the bottom is, you know, when do we feed that back? When do we have that conversation about it? So hold those thoughts in your head for the next breakout room, which is coming up. Now, I have a very sort of, it's another soapbox really. When I'm out moderating assessors, you see people stepping in, and we've all been there in our careers where we want to be the most helpful assessor in the world, right? And we want to chip in and we want to add value and we want to be helpful and positive, but we can end up causing ourselves all sorts of problems if we do that. If we step in too soon and we change the outcome of the rest of the day, we'll never know what the candidate would have done if we hadn't given them some different ideas. So for my money, I have a simple rule. I make my decisions first and I give them feedback after. So I will tell them how I think they're doing or how I think they've done once I've made my mind up. And I'll start to give them that constructive feedback and any helpful criticism once I'm sure where they're at. But, you know, I mean, even just the other week on the MCI assessment, I remember seeing the guys going down a gully on Trivan, and the assessor was stepping in and showing some different techniques. And instantly you're thinking, right, from now on, that candidate is trying to do what he thinks you wanted to see and not necessarily doing what they would have done on their own. And it's new to them, so it's not really fair to be assessing them on that at this point. And we've got ourselves in a difficult pickle. So my simple rule for this is share your reasons, okay? If you just share that process with the candidate and explain to them that, look, when we get to the end of a leg, maybe actually I'm not going to tell you whether you're there or not, because I want you to have the opportunity to correct yourself afterwards. If I say yes every time or no if it's not appropriate, then you won't you won't continue, and it will stop you from correcting yourself. And I want to see you correct yourself. We've had that lovely conversation about the fact that you are going to make some mistakes, but by backing off and not closing every task, I'm giving you the right to almost kind of keep correcting those mistakes yourselves, which is more important. Now, I remember laughing about this sort of, early on in the process of becoming an assessor. We've got that really difficult balance. And Anthony in that last feedback session was last breakout session was just saying no surprises is the holy grail. And we've got a tricky balance to strike there, haven't we? We don't want to be the zipped up, mirror shaded, ruthless bastard that doesn't give anybody any feedback. We do want people to know what's coming and to sort of get some feedback and expect the results that we give them. But we don't want to be sharing and steering things too much. As Guy put it the other day, we don't want to be coaching to competence, whereby people can come along on an assessment course and we're actually changing the outcome by delivering far more than we're assessing. Very tricky balance for us to get right. And in my experience, people will go through peaks and troughs of this over the years. So this is the point that I want you to put your mark on the page here, right? Most of us can relate to this, I hope, that when we start off assessing, we're fresh-faced, we're naive, we're enthusiastic, we want to give people the most positive experience, right? We want to be really helpful, and we want everybody to pass, so we give them loads of tips and loads of information and make sure the assessment is a good learning process. And pretty quickly what happens is that bites us on the arse and we get a candidate who complains. If you hadn't told me to do X, Y, and Z, I would have been absolutely fine, you bastard. And if we're not careful, we end up going far too far the other way, and we turn into that sort of stand up, right? Okay, if that's how it's going to be, I'm assessing you. I'm going to be the assessor. You crack on, and and slowly over time, we start to sort of chill out and relax, and we find a happy middle ground for that balance. So, very quickly, stick a mark on a piece of paper on the screen. Whereabouts in that learning journey are you right now? Excellent. That's great. We've got some super experienced people, so it's nice to see the density sort of coming in down here. I want to know about this one. I want to know what's just happened. But we've all been there, haven't we? You're trying to do the right thing, and it can end up, being counterproductive. And it's a very, very difficult sort of, balance for us to strike. Let me just clear those off, and we'll move on. So, as we head into the next sort of breakout room, I think the important things for us to think about here are how much feedback we're going to give and how and what on. Are we going to pick up on every tiny little thing? It's quite often the case that you'll see on the one hand some assessors that will pick up on absolutely everything, and the poor candidate can feel like they're getting battered. But actually, you might do this subconsciously. Most of us will set a sort of an acceptable parameter or bandwidth, if you like, because we go, yeah, that's bad enough that it's worth mentioning. But there's all sorts of little things. We can see opportunities for improvement or doing it better, but we don't necessarily pick up on them all. And it's really important, I think, for us to just work that out in our minds and just bring that to the conscious. We do it subconsciously. Just have a little think about it. Go into the assessment process thinking, okay, how much is a problem? How bad do things have to be before I'm going to mention them? And again, a classic one for me is that these little things all add up. We've quite often got to the end of a week, and you might find as a course director that the individual assessors didn't pick up on little things every day, but you get to the Friday of a course and you're kind of going, you know what, there was something every day that we weren't happy with. And though they didn't get specifically mentioned, I've now got to tell you that all those little things have added up to something more significant. And that can come as a surprise if we're not careful. Okay, and we're trying to iron out those surprises. So have a little think in your own mind. Where do you set that sort of comfortable parameter, that bandwidth of sort of acceptable tolerance in your feedback? Finally, of course, we need to close the task. And this is the one where I'm a big sort of believer of grappling with that balance. Again, I think the important thing is to share your reasoning with people. Don't worry, right? When we get to the end, I am not going to give you a thumbs up every time, because next week when you're out doing the job of a mountain leader on your own, there isn't going to be somebody giving you a thumbs up. So I need to know that you're not going to become dependent on that. But I also want to enable you to correct any mistakes. You know, if I put a stamp on it, if I close that door at the end of every task, I'm denying you the opportunity to keep going and keep talking to me and keep improving the situation. So have a little think about any top tips that you've got for that as we go into the next breakout session. I thought you might like this picture, right? Because this is 3 British mountain guys looking very lost, just to prove that it doesn't matter how qualified or experienced you are, everybody can make mistakes at some point, okay? So we need to be sort of sympathetic and compassionate about that when we're providing our feedback at the end of those tasks. Now, I'm going to steal and amalgamate or integrate 3 different concepts here into one. Some of you will have read Thinking Fast and Slow. Basically, we have 2 decision-making processes. We have the gut reaction and we have the conscious thinking in the head. And the gut reaction is fast, and the cognitive process is rational and takes a bit of time. There's also a model within sort of education for feedback of warm and cool. I hate the word warm; it's all a bit insipid. Warm and cool feedback. Well, let's mix these 2 up, right? In my mind, there are things that you need to talk about at the time, but those need to be simple. We need to make that really easy for the candidate to move on. We can't expect them in the middle of a complex task to do any complicated processing about any heavy duty feedback. So if we can, let's say that till later. Yeah. So I try and make the feedback that I give in the spur of the moment or the heat of the moment, I like to make it really direct, really simplistic, really easy for them to chew on and digest and react in a gut reaction kind of way and to move on. And anything more complicated, like you might want to consider a different way of doing that, I'll leave that till later in the process, until they've got time at the end of the day to do the thinking that I'm asking them to do. Okay. And that's super important, but we run a risk. Remember this transactional analysis model. If we are too judgmental about the way we give them that directed feedback, we can spin them out into a toddler type temper loop that we discussed earlier on. So make the heat of the moment feedback simple. It doesn't have to be simplistic, but simple to digest. Try and deliver it on an adult to adult. You know, I really like the way you did that. I've got to be honest with you, but and on a nice sort of adult to adult pitch where we're not judging them as people. That's super important. Then we've got the better chance of capturing that moment, giving them the details they need, and then moving on so we can deal with the complicated stuff later. So let's go into another little breakout room. Kat, it'd be fantastic if you can pop us in there. If it's possible for me to hover and see what a few of the rooms are doing, that'd be brilliant. But what I would like you to think about are those issues of what's hot and what's not. What do we have to deal with now? What in your experiences have happened where you've had to step in and intervene? What are the chances when you've thought, the times when you've thought, I would have been better off if I'd left that till later? And how can we best avoid those nasty surprises? Okay, we're going to have another few minutes on that. Folks, some brilliant conversations going on there. I wish I could have sort of jumped in and out of all of those rooms. That was really good. I don't know how common these were right across each of the different breakout rooms, but you know, some of those real nitty gritty issues of stepping in and knowing, you know, especially when we see a candidate doing things, we think they're definitely doing things just because that's what they think we want to see, and they're doing it to please us, and dealing with that sort of, you know, yeah, that's great, but how else might you have done that? Or how else, what other ways do you know to do that? We had a really good chat about the fact it's very important to frame that first with the sort of the result or the judgment. You know, yes, that's great. How many other ways can you think of? Otherwise, if you wade straight in on the, you know, how else can you do it? The first thing they're going to be doing is kind of going, well, why? What's wrong? and taking that as criticism. So some really good conversations about that. And then another group chatting about that sort of dilemma of letting things run for long enough. You know, when that person is walking out onto that cornice, how long do we give them to correct it themselves? If we step in too soon, then they won't work it out for themselves and they won't correct it, and we won't see that. If we give them too long, obviously it could go horribly wrong. You know, and talking about the merits of are you sure you want to do that kind of conversation? or maybe stop there for a moment and just talk me through the next 5 minutes. How do you see this playing out? What's your plan? And partly from my point of view, because I want to come away from those situations really very clear with the candidate of what was going to happen if I didn't intervene. There's nothing worse than getting back later and having a conversation about it, and they've either their recollection's not clear or that they've prepared their argument, and you have a chat at the end of the day with them saying, oh well, I would never have actually walked over that cornice. That was never actually going to happen. So you need to kind of balance that timing and the intervention very, very carefully at the time. Now we're going into chunk 3. We're halfway through, so we're going to have a sort of short comfort break in a second. Before we do, I want us to think about actually that feedback process. This next chunk is all about the mechanism of talking to people and giving them that feedback. So we're getting on to the nitty-gritty here. It's probably the meat of the session. So either at the end of the task, the end of the session, the end of the day, or at the end of the week. So when did you personally last actually critically reflect on the type of feedback, the timing of your feedback as we've been discussing, and the quantity versus quality of the feedback that you give? And I always think these sorts of sessions are brilliant as a catalyst to make us think about these things that otherwise we just sort of settle into habits that we might have for decades without ever sort of freshly reconsidering these. A simple tip for me at the end of the day is I like to think of myself as an assessor, especially if I'm part of a feedback to a team as well as to a candidate. I like to simply think of myself as a video camera, right? So my job is to go out, capture what I've seen, and then to replay that and reflect that to the candidate at the end of the day. Now, if you like models, this is as close as we're going to get to any sort of feedback models in this session. I'm not a fan of kind of coming up with endless mnemonics or sort of cheesy models that don't really work. But what I would rather do is direct you to this website. Edinburgh University have an absolutely fantastic reflection toolkit. You can find every reflection model under the sun on there. And what you'll really discover is that some of them are better than others for different situations and for different candidates. So an example there, might be the Carl model, where the context. So what the situation we were in was this. When I stopped you before we walked out onto that cornice, it looked like this was going to happen. In terms of action, what I saw was X, Y, and Z, and as a consequence, the results were. So what are the lessons we can learn from this? What are you going to do differently tomorrow on your next day of assessment? And really nice, simple tools just to make sure that we've captured everything, we've refreshed the context in their minds, we've seen their actions and we've respected and observed and we've paid attention to them, but that that they have consequences and we've discussed those. And I think that it's one of many models. I don't want to sort of dwell on those, but if you go onto that Edinburgh University website, you'll find masses of them, and some of them will really help. You'll also find that some, as I say, will suit some candidates better than others as well. So on that note, thinking about the kind of feedback you give people and the style and the way in which you deliver it, we're going to take a break. I'm going to ask you to leave us for it's 5 past. If you can come back at 10 past, and we'll start again at 15:15. Make sure we've got everybody back in the room. Then that'll be fantastic. Folks, at 15:15, let's get stuck back in. Hopefully we've got everybody back on. Thank you very much for your annotations on your choice of drinks. As we were saying earlier, if you tune in this evening, you'll find there are alcoholic options for you as well. Whoever it was who put that glass of red wine down at this time, don't forget, drinking at this time of day doesn't make you alcoholic, it just makes you a pirate. Now, the plan. So we're going to get stuck into the meat of it. This is the nitty gritty bit now. And we'll just, similar sort of format, we'll have a few slides just to provoke a bit of food for thought, and then we'll put you in some breakout rooms to discuss it and share your experiences. Really, the issue for me is making sure that end of session or in a task session or day feedback is really just a good quality reflection. And I've put in there, demonstrate active listening and detailed observation, because I feel like we owe it to our candidates, if nothing else, to demonstrate that we were really attentive and really paying attention and really focused on everything that they did and that we really noticed. Because even if you've put in a strong performance, there's nothing worse than getting to the end of the day and feeling like the assessor didn't really notice or hadn't paid the dues. And especially if they were concentrating so much on somebody else who was struggling. Everybody wants to feel like they've had their fair shot and they've had their slice of the pie in terms of attention. So really, for me, it's like the equivalent of, you know, if we were having a coaching and management conversation here, we'd be talking about active listening and reflecting back on using the words that the candidates had said. I think the conversation at the end of the session or day is very much like that. We have to walk that walk and demonstrate those behaviours and make it really clear that we've seen what's gone on. I like to go into that with a little bit of structure. So it's very much, look, I am, you know, like a video camera. I've been out with you today. I've recorded everything you've done, and I'm going to go back into this room with the rest of the assessment team, and I'm going to feed that back. But I owe it to you to feed that back to you as well. So here's what I'm going to share with the assessment team. What I've seen is this. What I haven't seen is this. I might like to have seen more of. And here are some things that you might want to do to improve. And we're in that cool or cold feedback phase now, where we don't have to shy away from giving them stuff to process, because the task is over and we've got that mental capacity left for them to be able to take stuff on board and think about it. And probably between one day and the next is the ideal gap for them to do some of that sort of cogitation. And far better that we give them positive things to chew on than leave them sort of fretting or sweating about the negative things that they might worry about before the next day. So it's quite an important thing. And I'm going to use the word integrity a lot in this next session because it's my favourite soapbox. It is really important that what I share with the rest of the assessors is what I share with the candidate. And we've all seen problems when an assessor has bottled it and not really wanted to have a sticky conversation with the candidate, but has then come back into the room and slagged them off left, right and centre to the rest of the assessment team. So you've got to make sure, you've got to have the integrity to make sure that those two avenues of feedback match up. So we of course need to focus on the syllabus, and that is always the backstop. Whenever we've had difficult conversations or difficult issues on assessments, my answer is always to go back to the syllabus. What does the syllabus say the candidate has to be able to do? So it's not down to our judgment, and that way we're not being personal about it, and we're not, you know, getting into that awkward thing where we're making a personal judgment. That way we can keep it focused, we can keep it simple, but simple doesn't mean simplistic. It can still be really good, high quality feedback at a good high standard and a good high level, but we can just get it across in a few words. So quality will always win over quantity in my book, because the candidate has to be able to go away and remember this. It's a really good thing for you to think about what we're trying to achieve here. You know, we've got an option to be an accelerator. They are trying to get to the point, the candidate's trying to get to the point where they're qualified. We can either accelerate the process through good quality feedback, or we can be a barrier and a block to that process. And what we're trying to do is help them at every stage to get further down the road, I hope. I'll put a question mark on there because you can answer that for yourself, obviously. And I think one of the important things is to understand that aim. It means that we can have a really clear aim to the feedback that we give. If we're trying to be an accelerator and help them get qualified, then we can categorize our feedback quite a lot better than perhaps we do. And I tend to try and break it up into two distinct types. For me, there's the stuff that's happened. So what I've seen is, and what you did was, and you know, remember that point when you walked out, that coolness. Some feedback is all about justification and understanding. It's about helping them understand why we've made the decisions that we've done based on the things that we've seen, and it's about past events. But perhaps the best feedback is the stuff that's about the future actions. This is the remedial stuff. So we had a really good conversation about that out on the hill, and you know, what you could do better is X, Y, and Z. The way to develop is this. There's, you know, assessment aside, there's always room for improvement, and you could do all these things to improve. Now, for me, I tend to find from my experience, and you can talk about this in the next breakout, when I focus on those future actions, if I tell people, here's a list of 3 things that you could do to improve in order to pass, I don't have to have a conversation about whether they're meeting the required standard or not, because it's obvious. So rather than having a backward-looking negative conversation, I'm having a forward-looking positive conversation. And in terms of that motivation model, I'm giving them back the autonomy. You know, if you would like to take this on board, you can choose to do X, Y, and Z in order to improve, and then you will meet the required standard. And it's really obvious to them that they haven't met the required standard. So back to that no nasty surprises, they get that message, but they get it through me giving them I'm almost positively identifying the gap that they've got to fill, rather than negatively pointing out mistakes by looking backwards. And because we're looking forwards, because we're being positive, because we're giving them the strategy and the control to do something about it, the whole thing has a much more sort of positive motivation to it. And that's where, when we talk about the content, we've got to get this right. There is a very simple rule, right? That the least helpful feedback in the world is telling somebody something they already know. It's just a complete waste of everybody's time. The only thing you can possibly achieve with that is to make people feel bad about themselves or miserable about it. Okay, if they already know that they screwed up on that navigation leg, you know, they really don't need us to keep banging on about it and reminding them. What they're really interested in is what can they do about it. And even better is if we can give them things that they can do about it based on their experience. So I've stolen this from sports coaching, but basically all learning involves some sort of problem solving. So the most helpful feedback we can provide will steer them towards the relevant sources of intrinsic feedback. So the things that they can do about this. And that's really important because, again, it's positive without being naff, and it has that level of integrity, but it gives them some positive actions and a positive way out of this. Hopefully that all makes sense to you. And that integrity is really important. I think one of the really important things is when it comes to the assessment team, is to remember that idea of the leadership model. We've got to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody has the same vision for this. That's super important. And I love this little team, this picture down here of my team out skiing, just been up the Dalburn Horn. It just proves that even when you have provided the most clear vision in the world of where it is we've been or where we're going, there's always one, if you just look at Jim at the back there, who thinks he's been somewhere else. And so it's very important to sort of communicate this with the team at the start and the end of each day. Okay, that's like, it's really, really important. Everybody knows what the expectations are, what they're being asked to do, what their job is, and that they're going out to gather this feedback. And do the same at the end of the course, and make sure that it's, you know, super consistent. That's really important. It's got to be consistent, as I said before, assessor to candidate, but what the assessors come back and talk about has got to measure up. Otherwise, we're going to end up with some nasty surprises at the end of the week when we're delivering a result that the candidate doesn't expect. And we really don't want that, okay? We've said it a number of times now, but no nasty surprises. So we're closing in on the nitty gritty, the kind of the crux bit, that results session. Personally, I've always gone into these believing that the one thing the candidate really wants to know, above and beyond all else, is how did I do? It's the most important bit of information you can possibly give people. Now, I'm going to feel slightly awkward here because there's all sorts of people that I've actually assessed in the attendance list here, who've been on the receiving end of this. But my response will always be to go into the results debrief and give them a result. No emotion, no sort of judgment, or it's just a matter of fact. It's absolutely what people want to hear. And at this point, I have seen everything. I've had people jump for joy, burst into tears. I've had people run out of the room, and that's just the people that have passed. And it honestly, every different sort of result you could possibly imagine. So when it comes to the sort of the results feedback, one of the best bits of advice I was ever given was from Nick Banks. And he said to me, Martin, when you're giving people difficult results, they just want the result. You don't want to sort of give it. And if you're not careful, you're going to get too emotional about it. So just remember, you are not alone, right? It's not you sitting in front of this person on your own. You need to imagine every candidate that's ever successfully worked really hard and has deserved this award and is proud to have it and proud to uphold the standard. Imagine all of them behind you, and you're speaking on behalf of all those people when you're giving somebody a difficult piece of feedback at the results debrief. Now, my top tip for that, super important is just to separate the performance from the person. So, you know, good people can do badly, okay, and can make mistakes. It doesn't make them a bad person. So the more you can separate the two, and the more you can move the performance to the center of the topic of the conversation, the better. And that's been one of the most useful mantras for me in all of those difficult conversations. And it's particularly useful when you get very experienced, positive candidates who have distinct aspects of the syllabus that they're not performing well at. So I can think of one particular guy, came back on numerous assessments, fabulous individual, masses of experience of being out in the hills, huge amount to offer people, would be an absolute joy to take folks out. But his belay building is rubbish. And it was almost as if we mixed these two up, we were just going to rubbish all the positives about this individual just for the sake of a conversation about anchor selection. And that wouldn't be right. That wouldn't be right at all. And if we can separate those out, focus on the performance, you know, you are great. And I'll come on to that in a minute, belief in the person. But let's focus on what the syllabus is asking you to do. That makes it much easier for people to take those results. So I then like to think about replacing the personality bit with, you know, the knowledge and the expertise. It's really clear from the week, you know, how much experience you've got, what knowledge you've got. I've seen this, I've seen that, I've seen all sorts of evidence of the knowledge and expertise that you bring. And we can have a conversation about your behaviours and how you choose to deliver that, because that is something that, again, is within your control. You can decide how you put that stuff across. But by having a conversation about those three topics, it's much, much better than ever getting involved in having a conversation about somebody's personality, which is something we shouldn't do. You know, that's not our business. Now, the reason that is going to be hard for them is that if people have come along, especially if they're really successful people in other walks of life, and they've come along expecting to pass and they haven't had a pass, they're going to be in this shock and denial phase. And I'm sure you can all recognize this, you know, avoidance, confusion, fear, numbness, blame. You know, how many of us have heard candidates coming back from an assessment saying, oh, it was only because that bastard assessor made me do X, Y, and Z. You know, they want to blame it on somebody else. It's perfectly natural. It doesn't help future candidates, of course, and we've all dealt with, you know, that baggage of people coming along with weird preconceptions of things they've heard on the rumour mill. But it's normally because an upset candidate is in this phase. You know, they're shocked, they're angry, and, you know, they're fed up about it. And they're probably going to become more fed up about it, okay? And the things here are they might feel overwhelmed, they might feel helplessness, or like they've got a lack of direction. It's obviously, we're not dealing with real grief, so it's not a mere lack of energy, but this is where we can start to give them some focus, the things that they can do to pick themselves up and get out of this. But in that initial results conversation, we're very unlikely to get this far yet. This stuff all comes later. It takes time, and we'll talk about that in the final section of the chat. To begin with, just brace ourselves and be sympathetic and empathetic of the fact that you know, people will be in these first early phases if it was a shock to them. So my next point, after saying, you know, well done, so and so, you've passed, or I'm afraid you haven't got to the required standard yet, but I've got some more feedback for you. Would you like to know what I think? And that's always an option that I build in. This feedback is for the candidate's benefits. It's theirs for the taking, not mine for the giving. Like I say, I've had people at that point go, no, actually, I'm off, and leg it out the door. Because if they're not ready, there is no point, absolutely no point in trying to force this. So I like to give them the option. You know, would you like to talk about it now? Would you like me to share it with you later? How can I find you? Would you like me to put it on CMS or email you? Would you like us to book a session in, a Zoom session online where we can chat about this in 2 days' time? You know, when would you like to know? How would you like to know? If you would like to know. You know, this feedback is my gift to you if you would like to take it, but I have no duty to ram it down your throat. I think that's super, super important at that stage. Results first, then give them the options. I also have a little soapbox if they do want to have a chat, and we hinted on this earlier in one of the breakouts. Somebody was saying how, you know, when the candidates, in fact it was Sam was asking about it, So when the candidates have got to the end of a leg and you kind of think, well, that was okay, but actually it looked like you were just doing some weird stuff because I'm here and giving you a hard time. And I have a real soapbox about this. Make sure you get the result in first. That was okay, right? And then you can get on with but can you think of any other ways of doing it? Or what would you really do if I wasn't here? If we cut to the last bit first, it makes them just nervous and uncertain about what the actual result is and the outcome is. And I'll give you an example that you can understand. When we get to the end of the assessment, however well the assessment has gone, they might have passed, they might not. It's very much like having a house survey done. And I often say to people, have you ever had a building survey? And they go, oh yeah. I go, right, it's a list of things that are wrong with a perfectly good house that you're going to buy anyway. So actually, if we're not careful, that's how this conversation is going to go. You have passed, right? What I just saw was 90% good. Your performance was awesome. But as always, there's some room for improvement. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion. And the danger is that what we're going to do is we're going to spend 90% of our time chatting about those improvements. So we're going to talk for an hour and it's going to be all about the negative stuff that you didn't do very well, that you could have done better, right? But actually, before we have that chat, do you understand? I thought what you did this week was amazing and it was 90% good. Great. In that case, we can move on. We've got a good little question. Yeah, good question coming in the chat room. We'll deal with that one in a second. Okay, so that's a really useful little model for you to sort of get your head around. Now, for me, those things I've just sort of shared my my little soapboxes, my sort of favourite rants. And for me, that leads me to have a very simple sort of feedback philosophy, right? And what I want you to do is go into the next sort of the final breakout room, and we're just going to chat for another sort of 10 minutes. But I want you to think about what your feedback philosophy is going to be. For me, it's simple. I've said it many, many times. It's all about integrity. I have to have the confidence to say to the candidate face to face what I would say to the rest of the assessment team. I owe it to them to be honest. I owe it to them to share my experience. That's why I'm in the job I'm in and why I've been sort of endorsed or approved by Mountain Training to have the role I have. And it's the same for all of you. We believe that you have the judgment and experience to help these candidates, but you owe it to them to do that with integrity. We have one mnemonic, that Carl model, and even that was me admitting that you can find them elsewhere if you want. We haven't had a single NAF feedback model in here. And for me, that's super important. All of this stuff that you'll find online about compliment sandwiches, the praise burger, you must compliment them on something first and then something that they can work on and then something else nice that they did well and sandwich it all neatly. Everybody can see straight through it, right? It's just, if you force yourself, far better to behave with integrity and be you and be the person that you really are than force yourself to use one of these models that's a bit naff and just puts everybody's teeth on edge. Okay, for me, that praise burger concept, it's a cheeseburger, right? It's so cheesy that everybody will just see straight through it and they really won't appreciate it. So my big top tip: separate the person from the performance. That's really important. And as I say, we've all had candidates where you go, you are amazing, right? You have got so much experience that you really deserve to be here, and it's only going to be a matter of time until you pass, but you're going to be able to take people out on the hill and give them an amazing experience because you obviously love this and you've got a passion for it and you've got a bag of experience to share, but you're not there yet. You're just not ready. And here are some things in the syllabus that you're not quite at the required standard for. That's really important. And that way we can confirm that belief in the person. So just because we're going to be focused on the facts and not the feelings doesn't mean we can't be compassionate about that and empathetic and supportive. Okay. And then my final soapbox is, as I say, let that candidate choose if and when to take the feedback. If they don't want it, there's no amount of beating it down their throats going to help. Cool. Now that's my sort of outlook on it. We want to know yours. So what would be really good now is to go back into the last for just the final sort of 10 minutes up to 12:45, and then I've just got 4 slides to finish on. We'll go into the final breakout room for 10 minutes now. And it'd be really brilliant for you to share some of your experiences of that. Any other models that you think are really helpful that you've come across. But start to have a chat and a think about what your feedback philosophy is. What is it that you're going to take into that results room as the things that matter to you. Thank you. Well, once again, folks, some really good conversations going on around there. That's absolutely brilliant. Lovely chat about the different phases of feedback, you know, that we can capitalize on the fact that people have got used to this from right from their training course and through their consolidation period. We've been giving them feedback, and it just peaks and troughs all the way through the assessment process right up until that end. And I suppose what I'm very keen to just close on here is the last sort of 3 slides, which is to say the process doesn't stop there. You know, this should be part of us supporting our candidates in their ongoing development, even if they've got a past result, but particularly if they haven't passed yet. And I think that's an important thing for us to stress. If we we'll look again in a second at that sort of grief cycle, but if we think about it, one of the most important things to do at the outset is to help them understand the result that we've given them. And that's the key. That's the thing that's going to enable them to accept that result if it's not one that they wanted. The important thing for me is if you actually look at the definition of the word defer, it's simply to put something off until a later time. And I'm staggered the number of candidates you have a conversation with, and you'll ask them on a reassessment about their previous assessment, and they'll tell you the bits that they failed in. And I'm always very keen to sort of go, no, you didn't fail on your micronav, you know, or you didn't fail to walk on a bearing. We just didn't see enough of the good stuff yet. And it's that yet word that's the most important bit. You know, you just, you know, I think right early on in the first sort of breakout, Phil, you were saying, you know, that sort of the fact that they're going to get to the end of this, you know, in due course. Our job is to help them get to the end of it. It may just be that they come back too soon and they're not there yet, you know, and a defer is not the end of the world. But it's not like they've failed on certain elements or certain aspects. A defer just means that we haven't been able to see enough of the good stuff yet. So they get a chance to come back and do more of that and show us what we need to see. I think that's really important sort of, you know, philosophy on that. If you're interested in these sort of models, probably one of the best books I've ever seen on this. Like all these things, you know, it's been marketed and branded and packaged up as a mind management, you know, course, and predominantly because you'll sell millions more books than you will if you just sell it to elite sports people. But this is Steve Peters from British Cycling, who, you know, his big thing was helping elite athletes cope with, you know, with knockbacks and setbacks and come back fighting. And his big passion there is for this AMP model. You know, you learn to accept and you move on with a plan. And as we've said numerous times through today, the important bit of that feedback is making sure that we give people the plan. You know, we give them the information that they need so that they can go away and improve and develop, and that they are then back in control. You know, they've got the autonomy, they've got the agency, they feel like this is something that they can influence. And if they just go away and follow the plan and then, you know, put the development plan and the improvements into action, then they will come back and they will successfully sort of complete the task in due course. And that, when you look at the grief cycle, makes perfect sense. You know, if you look at early on, when we're first delivering those results, it's very emotional, of course. You know, people are likely to be surprised and angry and in denial. They're likely to be fed up about it. I thought this one was really interesting, that people go through a sort of a classic phase of dialogue and bargaining. I mean, isn't this the candidate that resorts to social media to tell everybody else why there was a problem with the system, which was why they didn't, you know, they didn't pass? So the more that we can actually give them the information to bypass this chunk, it's not particularly helpful. You know, get onto this chunk where they accept it. The feedback was good quality, the result was good quality, but they understand what they need to do to put a new plan in place. That then moves them into this area where they're empowered, they're confident, they've got their self-esteem back, and they can move forwards, not in this case to a more meaningful life, but, you know, towards a successful assessment result in the future. And we've given them the tools that they need to get to there. Yeah, and it's a very useful model because it's, as we say, you know, whilst it's not as serious as grief, you know, people do go through surprisingly close to that pattern of behaviour after an assessment result. So it doesn't stop there. You know, we said before that the training staff behaviour is really important. So I've just hinted at how we can help people along with the grief cycle with this, but the more we can give them autonomy, that sense of agency, people want to feel like they are in control of their own destiny. So give them the feedback and the advice that they need to take control of the plan to finish this off. The more structured it can be, the better. So the more specific and detailed we can be, the better. We want to give them clear expectations so that they believe that they can perform those tasks and come back in the future. And then the more we can involve them in that process, especially good if you defer that feedback. You know, if you can get into the habit of saying to people, let's have a conversation in the middle of next week, and then we can follow up, you know, with some writing later or however you wish. The more touch points we have, the more likely they are to engage with that, to take it on board, and to keep going with the process, you know, and to believe that we're genuinely supporting them. And that matters to people. On that note, that's what was I've put up a slide thanking myself. There we are. Thank you, Mountain Training. Thank you, folks, for all that massive amount of input through there. We've finished with, as planned, with just a few minutes left to go. So I'll stay online until 1 o'clock. So if anybody's got any questions or wants to put anything either in the chat room or discuss anything, then stick with us and do that. Otherwise, inevitably, in terms of feedback, we would love to know what you thought of the session. I'm always very keen, either personally or centrally through Mountain Training England, through the conference organisers. That would be great. You know, let's have it warts and all. We're always trying to improve, especially in this sort of wacky medium. And unless there's any other questions, your next session is Graham at 2 p.m. this afternoon.
Right, well, I'm just going to say thanks so much, Martin. That was brilliant. And there's really nothing more I can say on top of that, other than that, you know, as mountain training providers, you are so influential over your candidates, and we all want the same thing. We want them all to progress as best as possible, and for them to see assessment and as part of training. You know, it's all just part of their journey. Sometimes candidates miscalculate over the timing of that assessment, and we're just going to help them wherever they are in that journey to keep going. And that's what feedback's all about, by giving them that support. So anything we can do to help them on their way and to feel positive about the future has got to be a good thing. So thanks again, Martin. That was really useful. And thanks everybody for attending. You staying on for a minute or two, did you say, Martin?
Yeah, I'll stay online until 1 if anybody wants to.
Cool. Fire away, people, if you want to ask.
Nice comment from Julie there in the chat box. We've got so much better at this, and we, you know, supporting the candidates through it, which I think is great.
Yeah, that's a really good point from Julie.
For those who can't see the chat room, Julie was just saying that a lot of practice is through our own poor experience early in our careers 20 plus years ago. But just show how much things have moved on.
Because we all model off our own experiences, don't we, Martin? And as you say, they could be quite old.
So a course that I did, Martin, that I thought was that was interesting to see, it came up on your one as well. When I was part of the rescue team, we got the opportunity. Some of us got the opportunity to go on a course run by the police about how to deliver bad news and what people are going to, how to deal with the friends of the victims. And it was a lot more heavy duty than running ML assessments, obviously. But the cycle that people go through, or the process that people go through, is very clear. I just thought it might be useful talking. Have you talked to people who have to do that? You know, the people who put those talks together, I suppose, because there was somebody doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why I was keen to sort of include that, you know, classic grief cycle in there, because if you could just be empathetic about the fact that is how people are going to react, and it just means you can match the right feedback to the right stage of where they're at on that process. There's no point in trying to have a really in-depth conversation about the future and the plan if all you've got is anger and denial at that point.
Yeah. It's almost, it should be a requirement of being an assessor that you failed an assessment yourself at some stage. That's an interesting one too. But if you're a lot of people who are at the top of these sort of things never fail assessments because they're really good at it all. And so it's one that well, I for one have failed a few, so I know what it feels like.
definitely.
And it helped. I think it is helpful in terms of being a good assessor. Not that I would put myself forward as necessarily being, but it's helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Empathy is always a good thing, isn't it?
Right, I think we're just about there, aren't we, folks?
Nice to see you.
Yeah,
Nice.
thanks, Martin. Cheers.
Right,
All the
thanks,
best.
it's really lovely to see so many familiar faces
Yeah,
on. It's been
and you.
brilliant. Great.
Thanks very much.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Martin. Bye, everybody.
Cheers.